In the last lesson, we saw how to work with template files using the automatic method. In this lesson, we are going to cover how to do the same thing and more using the manual method. Unlike the automatic method, the manual method involves writing the code for what we want our package to do when it's being configured. This can be to create template files, as we will see in this lesson, or do advanced stuff like installing dependencies, among other things, depending on the package you are building. The manual method is useful when we need to perform complex logic or tasks in our packages. For that, we need to create an instructions.ts file in the root of our package. Inside this file is where we will write the logic of what we want done when the package is configured. Once again, let's refactor our code such that we will be getting the config values from users at the point of configuring the package. So instead of hard-coding these values here, we're going to get them from the user that is configuring the package. Adonis.js supports different types of file formats for template files. But for this course, we'll be making use of the mustache format. So inside this template file, we are going to make use of the mustache syntax. So we are going to set the values of these options to a variable or a placeholder that will be replaced with whatever the user provided at the point of configuring the package. We are making use of the mustache syntax, which is the double curly braces. And the variable name is simply going to be session key name. Then we'll do the same thing here. And this will be password timeout. Then lastly, this will be redirect to. Now let's head back to the instructions.ts file. Before we start writing any code here, let's install the sync package, which we will be needing. npm install at adonis.js/sync. And it's going to be installed as a dev dependency. Then we can import it inside the file. Import all as sync static from at adonis.js/sync. While we are here, let's also import application contract from at ioc column adonis/core/application. Then lastly, we are going to import join from path. The instructions.cs file should export a default function called instructions that will contain the things or tasks that need to be carried out. So let's create the function export default async function, which will be instructions. The function is going to accept 3 arguments. The first one is the project root, which will be a string. Then app, which will be a type of application contract. Then lastly sync, which will be a type of sync static. For now, we're going to leave the function empty. Then we'll define the types for the instruction states. States are basically the values we want to be available when configuring the package. So type instructions state, which is going to be an object that will contain the session key name, which will be a string. Then the password timeout, which will be a number. Then lastly redirect to, which will also be a string. Now we can write the logic for creating the config file. We are going to wrap it inside a function that we will call makeConfig. The function will accept 4 arguments. The first one will be the project root, which will be a type of string. Then app, which will be a type of application contract. Then sync, which will be a type of sync static. Then lastly state, which will be a type of instructions state. Inside the function, we are going to first get the config directory. So const config directory equals app.directories map. Then we'll get the config directory. Remember the standard directories for Adonis applications I mentioned in the last lesson. This is going to get the config directory. And if for whatever reason we can't get it this way, then we are going to set it to the default config directory. Next, let's get the config path. Join. This will take the config directory, then the name of the config file is, which is going to be confirm-password.ts. Next, let's create the template. Const template equals new sync.files. Remember I said Adonis.js supports multiple file formats. So we have the formats here: ini file, JSON file, mustache file, which is the one we are interested in. This accepts 3 arguments: the base path, which will be the project root, then the file name, which will be the config path, then lastly the template path, which will be join, the directory name, then the templates directory, then lastly the template file, which is inside the config directory /password-confirm.txt. I'm going to save to reformat. So this will get the template file. In most Adonis packages you'll be creating, you'll be doing this in multiple places. So let's wrap it in a function that we can reuse. I'm going to create a function which I'm going to call getStub, and it's going to accept the relative path to the template files. So this is going to be an array of strings. I'm going to spread this. Then here I can do return, then what we have before, but this time we're going to use the relative paths. Then here we can make use of the function getStub, and it's going to accept just the relative path to the template file. We now have the template. Now let's save it to Dix, and we are only going to create the file if it doesn't exist. So if else, so the condition will be if template.exist. That is, if the template already exists, we are going to display an appropriate message. So sync.logger.action. The action we are doing here is create. And since the file already exists, we're going to say that, oh, this action has been skipped with the following message. So we're going to say the config path file already exists. Otherwise, we are going to create the file. So template.apply. So we want to apply the states that the user has provided, then we'll commit, that is, we save the file to Dix. Then lastly, we can display an appropriate message, sync.logger.action. Again, the action is create, but this time it succeeded. Then we can just pass it the config path. Using the apply method here and passing it the states, we replace these with the values the user provided. If you are using partials in your template files, you can also change the partials method and pass in whatever partials that you are using. But since in our case we are not making use of partials, so I'm going to revert this back. We now have the function to create the config file. Next, let's add a way to prompt users to enter the required values at the point of configuring the package. Since the user is going to be providing 3 values, one for the session key name, the password timeout, and the redirect URL, we are going to have 3 prompts which we are going to wrap inside their individual function. So I'm going to create the first one, async function get session key name. This is going to accept sync, which will be a type of sync static. Then inside the function, we can return sync.getPrompt.ask. We are going to ask the user to enter session key name. Also, we can perform validation on the value the user provided. So validate, which will take the value the user provided, and we are just going to ensure that the user provided a value. So return value.trim.length, and I'm going to cast this to Boolean. If we want, we can also enter a default value that will be used in case user does not supply any, but we won't be doing that. Next, I'm going to duplicate this a couple of times. Then this will be get password timeout, and here will be enter confirm password timeout. Then lastly, get redirect to, and this will be enter confirm password failed redirect. Now we have everything in place. We can now come back and fill in the instructions function. First, we are going to create the state, which will be a type of instructions state, and it's going to equals an object containing the session key with a default value of confirmed password at, then password timeout, which is going to be 60 seconds. Then lastly, redirect to, which is going to be confirm dash password, just like we have them before. Next, we are going to update them with whatever values the user provided. So state.session key name equals await get session key name. Then we'll pass to it sync. Then state.password timeout equals await get password timeout. Then pass to it sync as well. Then lastly, state.redirect equals await get redirect to. We are getting an error here. Type of string is not assignable to type of number. That is because whatever values the user has entered will be treated as a string. So we need to cast the value to number. Now we've gotten the values the user entered. So what we need to do now is call the make config method and pass it those values. So make config, the project root, app, sync, then lastly state. So that is all we need to do in the instructions.cs file. Now let's head over to package.json, and inside the Adonis.js object, we're going to add the file inside the object. So I'm going to add it at the top here. The key is going to be instructions, and the value is going to be the instructions file, which is going to be inside the build directory. So build build/instructions.js. Then lastly, we need to add the file inside the files array, build/instructions.js. It is worth mentioning that using an instruction file and the template objects are not mutually exclusive. So we can have both inside the Adonis.js object, provided that they are not doing the same thing. But in our use case, they are doing the same thing. So I'm going to get rid of the template object. Now we can republish the package. And if we check the build directory, we should now have the instructions.js file. Then we can head over to the application and update the package and configure it. Now we are prompted to enter the session key name. If I hit enter without providing the value, we should get an invalid input message because of the little validation we added. So I'm going to enter a value, confirmed password at, then the timeout is going to be 60 seconds. Then the redirect URL is going to be confirm-password. And you can see we got the file already exists because the config file already exists from the last lesson. So let me delete it and run the command again. Oops. Template file not found. Password-confirm. Oh, I think I mixed that up. So this should be confirm-password.txt. I bet you saw that. Again, let's republish, then update and configure. Now everything is working as expected and the config file has been created with the values we entered. Just to be sure that the values here are the ones we entered and not the default one, I'm going to delete this file again and rerun the configure command. This time I'm going to enter different values. Again, the file has been created. And again, it is using the values I just entered. So that is how to create template files using the instructions.ts file. Though the focus on this lesson was creating template files, but we can use the instructions.ts file for things other than template files, just as I mentioned earlier.